Thank you. After the end of the Dutch administration at the Cape, we now look at the coming of the British at the Cape. And we are aware that the Cape had been very, very, very important. And that's why we see the Cape bringing a lot of interest from the Europeans. And the first ones being the Dutch, and the second one being the British. Of course, we shall later see the Dutch coming back to occupy the same, but in another form, in a diluted form, which they called the Batavian administration. But here, before we look at the coming of the British at the Cape, we have to understand how or who they were. Already told that they were the second Europeans to occupy the Cape. After who? After the Dutch. And when did they occupy the Cape? They occupied it twice. The first one being in 1795, after the collapse of the Dutch East Indies Company, that was the DEICO, which collapsed in 1794. And after that, the British had to come in. Remember, the British had been very instrumental in the wars of dispossession, or the Kafir Wars, or the Eastern Frontier Wars. So, their involvement in the wars had a hidden motive, because they also wanted to finally do what? Occupy the Cape. So that's the first British occupation, 1795, immediately after the collapse of the DEICO. Then after that, they came back in 1806. That's why we are looking at the 1795 occupation and the 1806 occupation. And the 1806 occupation came after the collapse of the second Dutch occupation, and which was known as the Batavian administration. So the British occupied the Cape twice. First in 1795 and the second in 1806. So meaning the Batavian administration was between 1803 to 1806. That is the one we called the Batavian. And we are going to look at it also. It was called the Batavian admin. So from 1806 to 1803 to 1806, it was the second Dutch administration. Meaning all the two European powers ruled the Cape twice. And of course, the second Dutch admin was temporary, as we have seen, only 3 years. And of course, they realized they could not stay there. And later we shall see them protesting the occupation of the Cape by the British. And what was the reaction? They trekked. They trekked. That is, they moved into the what? Into the interior, which is known as the Great Trek in the history of South Africa. But before that, our focus now should be on the coming of the British. How they finally occupied the Cape after the first Dutch admin. But by 1806, the British occupied the Cape after the resumption of the Napoleonic Wars. This is the second administration we are talking about, between 1806 up to 1814. Yes. The resumption of the Napoleonic Wars, Napoleon Bonaparte of France, a man who had brought trouble to the whole world. Wars had infiltrated the entire Europe. But at the end of the day, it was affecting the entire globe. So the British realized that after the treaty that he brought together the Dutch and the British, that was the Treaty of Amiens. They call it the Treaty of Amiens. The signing of the Treaty of Amiens was intended to create peace between the British and the Dutch. And the Dutch had fled to Britain. But because of the threats posed by the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, the British were not safe. They were insecure. And they therefore rushed to occupy the Cape to avoid the rivalry with the what? With the French, whom they thought would now take over the seas, especially the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. So that was because of the fear or the insecurity that had been caused by the Napoleonic Wars. That's why we see the British coming in to occupy in 1806 after the collapse of the Batavian admin, which had become so weak and gave way to the coming of the British. That's the background of the British occupation. Now we have the reasons why the British picked interest in the Cape. Give reasons why the British picked interest in the Cape. Why did they come to occupy the Cape Coast? Number one is strategic location. Strategic location, that is to say, halfway to the east. When we talk of halfway to the east, what is the east? It is entirely the far east. So the British were very much interested in the far east trade with Asia, trade with Pakistan, Indonesia, all those far eastward countries. And of course the passage was the Indian Ocean. So they had to ensure that they protect the Indian Ocean in order to secure their interests in the what? In the far east. That's the reason about the occupied. Another, the Cape was good for defense and protection. How was it good for defense and protection? Because of the strategic location, it was easy to establish defense posts and ensure that they guard any threat, especially the European threats. So the Cape being strategically located, the British knew that it was easy to establish defensive posts here. So that one will now create their security en route to the east far once again. Reason three, the collapse of the DECO, the Dutch East Indies Company. With the collapse of the DECO, it gave a bleak future to the Dutch admin. The survival of the Dutch administration was basically dependent on the Dutch East Indies Company. And with the collapse of this gigantic company, it was giving way, it paved the way for those who were ready to occupy. It was like they had given up control over the Cape, and whoever was ready had to take over. And who was that? The British. The need to protect the English farmers at the Cape. Of course, the occupation was based on so many reasons. Another one was the need to establish farms. After establishing farms, because of the good soils at the Cape, the farmers needed protection. The British ensured that the other settlers had to be given protection. And the protection that had come later resulted into colonization. So it was hoodwinked into protection, but later manifested itself into what? Into colonial occupation. So the protection of the farmers was disguised. Protection of farmers was just a mere disguise, which at the end of the day resulted into British colonial occupation of the what? Of the Cape, but which was under the guise, under the camouflage of protecting the farmers. Another reason was prestige. Prestige, yes, of course, this is one of the colonial motives prestige. The British could not allow to be left behind. They could not allow to be left behind in this. Why? Because other European countries had already expressed interest at the Cape. It could not be left out. Moreover, it was boosting and very strong as far as the Navy was concerned. As far as the Navy was concerned, what is the Navy? And these are forces on sea. So the strength of the Navy forces could have been a way of giving the British that kind of prestige, that we are strong, we are strong. So prestige was one of the reasons, and of course, to ensure that the more colonies the British got, the more powerful it could be. The need for market for English goods, trade again. Trade was one of the reasons that brought them here. They had manufactured a lot of items, and this was because of the Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution. What was the Industrial Revolution? A time when industries mushroomed all over Europe. And that was immediately after the collapse or the abolition of slave trade. So with the abolition of slave trade and replaced by legitimate trade, it saw a lot of industries mushrooming all over Europe. And with the mushrooming of industries, what does that one mean? That industries now manufactured very many items for sale. But the problem was their market for all these products in Europe. And of course, we are told that it is Britain that championed this Industrial Revolution. It was the pioneer of the Industrial Revolution. And because of this, we saw the need to look for markets. Because now, the people in Europe could not consume all the goods that had been produced by these industries. So what does that one mean? That the British had to look for markets elsewhere. That's why they could even afford to send the slaves, the redundant labor, home. They could now afford to send the redundant labor back home because they were doing nothing. Because the work now which was being done by the slave had been taken over by industries, by machines. So, and the rate at which machines were producing these items was too high. And what does that one mean? That there was a risk, there could be a risk if these items were not given, if market was not sought elsewhere. And that's why the British had to come and occupy the Cape in order to dispose of the surplus items manufactured in the industries at home. Another one was the British feared European wars. They feared European wars, and which wars in particular? The Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon being with the high ambition. In fact, he had overwhelming ambition to conquer the whole world. He began with Europe, conquered most of the European countries. They had all been under his grip. That was a worry for the British, that the more Napoleon eats across the globe, the more that is going to affect colonial policies abroad. Because the British already had interest in the whole of Africa. They had already occupied the northern Africa. So they were fearing that if this Napoleon is not given a hold, he would also take over. And that would mean that the future of the British trade across all the seas, Atlantic and India, was at a high risk. And hence, the need to occupy are enough. The need to protect the sea route to India. Yes, this is again economic rivalry again. Economic rivalry vis-a-vis greed. Vis-a-vis greed. The British were greedy. They were greedy in the sense that they didn't want anybody to take over the waters. So this monopoly over the Indian Ocean trade could have brought the British to occupy the Cape? Greed and the European rivalry. It was like survival for the fittest. Who is stronger takes the day. At the end of the day, the British realizing that they are strong in the navy, they had to ensure that those routes are secured. And at the moment the route is secured, so trade with India and beyond was going to be possible. So this is why the British had to come in and take over the Cape, which later came to be known as the Cape of Good Hope. And another reason, the need to, the good relations between the Brits and the Dutch. This is known as the Anglo-Dutch exchange. Yes, one of the reasons why the British occupied the Cape was because of the good relations between the English and the Dutch. So the Anglo-Dutch exchange of ports, of the Cape, the English agreed with the Dutch that because you are now a fugitive, remember the Dutch king had fled to France, to England. So the protection given to the Dutch king was enough for the two countries to sit under a round table and discuss the way they would handle this exchange. So that one came to the Anglo-Dutch exchange, where the Cape was given to the British and giving protection to the Dutch king and the Dutch at large.